Hello everybody, it's Thursday, it's Lit Soc. We've had quite a foggy day, so it's quite atmospheric outside and raw for our horror fest this afternoon. We didn't do this at Halloween, and normally we leave ghost stories perhaps a little bit until Christmas, but today, by popular request, it's horror. Not something I'm very fond of reading. However, I'm going to start with The Woman in Black. Who has read this?
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Who has seen it?
Ah.
Okay, right. It is both a very scary read and it's horrific on stage, is it not? Yes, Year 11 are nodding, but keeping quiet. It's one of those books that when I read it, I had to sleep with the light on. I'm sure I've said this before. And certainly when I first saw it, I swore I'd never go again. I did go again for my sins, and I'm never going again. Terrifying, horrific.
Dramatic. Nightmare-inducing.
Nightmare-inducing, but it is a brilliant play from a very, very atmospheric book. And also, of course, as Year 11 are all too well aware, and Year 10, it's one of the passages that we have to look at for language paper 2. It is basically Susan Hill's take on a 19th century ghost story, Victorian ghost story, and what happens to a young man when he goes to a very lonely place called Eel House and is confronted with what he doesn't really believe in, does he? A ghost. The Woman in Black. Sadly, a vengeful spirit who takes her revenge not only on the local population but on him as well. Her name is Janet Humphrey, and she's lost a child and she cannot rest. So one of the chapters, which is when he's staying alone in the house, is called Whistle and I'll Come to You. Mr. Humphreys will recognise this because it's one of the titles of M.R. James's short stories. And it's very atmospheric, and it starts in a storm. During the night, the wind rose. As I'd lain reading, I'd become aware of the strong gusts that blew every so often against the casements. And he's in his bed, remembering his childhood. And then there is again a cry, that familiar cry of desperation and anguish, a cry for help from a child somewhere out on the marsh. There was no child, I knew that. How could there be? Yet how could I lie here and ignore even the crying of some long dead ghost? Rest in peace, I thought, but this poor one could not. Fortunately for Arthur, he has a little dog with him called Spider, who's been lent to him, and it is Spider who keeps him sane when all sorts of terrible things begin to happen. Do I recommend it? I do. It is beautifully written, and after this she wrote some more stories, ghost stories. Dolly, I can't think of anything even more sinister, but that is. The Travelling Bag, there's some really good stories in that. And there's a real sense of menace also in I'm the King of the Castle, where a boy is haunted by a crow and also bullied unmercifully. So, yes, see this very atmospheric cover, lots of dead trees or winter trees, and it's been called A Rattling Good Yarn, the sort that chills the mind as well as the spine. So there we are. Our Horror Fest is off and running. Okay, Alan, do you want to start, as it was your request?
Oh, yes, sure.
Yeah. Tell us about your choices.
Right, so over the summer I picked up An Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky.
Yeah.
Quite thick, but I thought it was really, really good. It is a red dot one, so Year 10 and above. But he's got a very good way of describing the events going on. And there are certain scenes where you get like a really visceral sense of horror because I don't want to spoil too much, but there's some stuff that goes on with like distorting people's bodies, and you just get a really visceral sense of like eyes being sewn shut and mouths being sewn shut. So much so that at certain points I had to close the book and put it down for a little bit. Twist ending, which
Yes, always a good thing. Yes.
good thing. I had some mixed thoughts about this one, but
Okay.
all in all, really amazing read. If you've got some free time, would highly recommend it.
Summer or winter though? Summer because it's so horrifying, or winter because you can curl up with it?
Summer, I'd say. You want some light when you're reading that one.
Not dark at 3 o'clock.
I'm just reading a blurb. It sounds very, very creepy, and yeah, it is thick. So he's most famous for The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Has anyone read that one?
Oh yes.
So this is a bit of a change of pace. It's fair to say from that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, and the other two I'm going to talk about, don't have them here, but Stephen King's The Shining and Stephen King's Doctor Sleep, which is a sequel to The Shining taking place 30 years later, I think. I enjoyed The Shining much more than I did Doctor Sleep, because in both of them they've got a very convoluted magic system, which I didn't really understand, and it kind of draws away from the actual horror going on. What I would say about The Shining is that the film does a much better job of building suspense, and also the soundtrack of the film is absolutely amazing. I really enjoyed that. In terms of Doctor Sleep, it just wasn't hitting the mark as much for me because it had a very weird protagonist and a very weird relationship with the protagonist and a side character. It tried to be fatherly but was more very creepy. Also more of the really weird convoluted magic system, although the antagonist seems pretty cool in that one, so I would read it for her if I was going to recommend it to anyone. Read it for, I think her name's Rosie the Hat. So, yeah, those are the 3 horror books I've recently read. I read them over the summer.
Okay, right, thank you.
All right,
Thanks
thanks
very
Alma.
much. Ellen.
Thank
That's
you.
great. Okay, who's next then? One of the year sevens? We're going to have Twilight now?
Okay, sure. So, I didn't really know what horror book to choose because I don't really read horror books. I want to read The Shining, but I can't be bothered to like pick it up because I'm reading another book at the moment.
Okay.
And so I like Twilight because it was suspenseful, but I feel like stuff happened a bit too fast. Like there wasn't enough build up in front of all the suspenseful things. Like, especially in New Moon, which is the second
The
book.
second one, yeah.
Before something really suspenseful happened, there was no build up, and it just happened for me.
Okay.
But
So, do you think she was it, because New Moon's a bit bigger, isn't it, in terms of
no,
size?
I think
About
it's
the
the
same?
same.
About the same?
It's about
Okay.
the same. I've just finished reading it, and I think the endings as well. They end on a point where you know action's about to happen,
Right.
and then at the start of the book it doesn't, which kind of alarms me.
Oh, it's a bit disappointing, isn't it, if it doesn't
Yeah.
happen? Yes. Oh, okay. So what about the characters?
I like the characters. I think Bella's very different in the movie to
Oh,
when
right.
she is in the book.
Okay.
Because she's more weak in the book, and then she's stronger in the movie, and she's bolder
Mm-hmm.
and more confident in the movie. And all the vampires in the movie, I think they're showcased well because they've got weight, makeup and stuff, and it's just how I imagined them
So they look good.
to look.
Yeah.
I like my favourite character is probably Alice, because she's one of those back characters which is one of the most important characters as well, but is not really talked about much.
Okay. Yeah. And what is it about Alice particularly?
I don't know.
You don't know?
It's just, yeah.
Just something about her
Yeah.
that appeals to you rather than Bella?
Yeah. Because I find Bella's too weak.
Okay.
I think many would agree with you on that.
Yeah. And she's too emotional.
Which can be a bit annoying, can't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But she's different in the movie, isn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they probably, it's a different audience, isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah.
Maybe it's just when it was, the difference between when the book was written and when the movie was made.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, the book's
and
quite old now.
have you read any other vampire stories or anything?
No.
Like you have read Frankenstein?
Oh yeah, in year 6 we had to read it, a part of it. Well, we read
Abridged.
like a mini version.
Because you could argue that that's quite horrifying, couldn't you? After all, Victor puts together a new human being. Well, a new being from
Yeah, but
dead bits,
yeah.
dead parts. So it's not quite the same as vampires, but it's sort of along those lines, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah. Did you feel sorry for the creature, or were you sorry for Victor?
Sorry for the creature. Everyone says sorry for Victor, and I'm like, no,
No.
it's the creature.
Yeah, because Victor was horrible, wasn't he?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So would you recommend Twilight to
Yeah.
those who haven't read it?
Yeah.
All of them? Or you've only just read 2?
I've only read 2, so because they're massive, and there's like 5 of them.
Yeah, it's a big commitment now, isn't it?
Yeah.
'Cause there's you've got the new sequel, or is it prequel?
Yeah, Midnight Sun it's called, and it's basically a retelling from Edward's point of view.
Right.
Yeah, so there's
The
like
first book.
loads.
Right.
It's taken a long time to decide to do that.
Okay.
But
What's
it's
also
finally done.
interesting is that
she didn't want to.
She didn't want
You want
to.
to.
She wasn't going to continue it, and then she did, and then some of it got leaked, and then eventually she was just like, okay,
Oh.
let's just publish it, and did that.
That I didn't know any of that, so
yeah, right.
good to know.
Right.
So if she wrote it under duress, if she wrote it reluctantly, then it's probably not something that's with.
What I find really interesting is that one of the actors in the film, has just done a series with Emily Blunt, and he's playing a Native American, and he's just amazing.
Oh, okay. All right.
And so he's now obviously a mature man, but it's just fabulous. So, but first seen in the Twilight movies. So, yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Miss Ria, do you want to go next?
Yep, sure. So I did have the other Susan Hill books, who wrote The Woman in Black, which is what she's most known for. But she actually has loads of these really short novellas, and they're all great. See, this one's only 150 pages. But I picked these because I kind of wanted to talk about how good short stories and novellas are in terms of horror, because big tomes like this are great too, but I think personally I really like the really short ones because you just keep the pace up and nothing really gets explained, so it stays scary, because the scariest things are the things we don't understand, I think, sometimes. So if you like short stories, I would definitely recommend reading some horror short stories, because it just works really well as a format, I think. But I also have this one to talk about,
Yes.
which is called Mexican Gothic. And she's quite a new author. She's from South America. But she kind of takes the classic British horror ghost story and kind of gives them a South American slant. And they're really interesting. She writes a lot about haciendas and things like that. And they're really great reads. If you like the classic ghost story, but maybe you're a bit tired of all the tropes and things like that, this is like a nice way of keeping that energy going. This one is just a classic horror haunted house story. It's set in the 50s, and it's about a socialite who receives a letter from her cousin, who is about to move into her soon-to-be husband's big old haunted house, and lots of weird things are happening. So she calls her in to say something's happening here. But this one's great because the house is a character just as much as all the characters, and it's in a way in that kind of trope that you get in a lot of these.
So is it a bit sort of magical realism as well?
Not really, but it's more kind of the house being like a entity in
like
a way.
In, The Haunting of Hill House?
A little
One of
bit,
yours
yeah.
favourites,
It's
yeah.
not kind of explicitly said, but it sort of plays a part. So yeah, these are really good. She's got a new one that's just come out. I can't remember what it's called though, but that's got a similar trope. But obviously in Mexico and places like that, they've got a lot of folk tales and horror stories and things like that, like La Lorna. Have you heard of her? She's a bit like the woman in black, but she's the woman in white. She's it's a story of a woman who, something to do with, she lost her child. So it's like a horror folk tale around Mexico that, you know, children can't be out late at night because she'll come and get you. So I wonder if she took a little bit from that. But it's one of those things that was obviously made to keep kids safe, not to go out at night to be scared of this character. But there's a lot of stories like that around Mexico.
Because there was an in Argentina when after the coup, when huge numbers of people disappeared, the mothers who went to publicise their fate all wore white.
So maybe there's
and one of them, the main leader of that movement, that disappeared, to remember the disappeared, she died 97 she was this last week, so it's just reminded me of that.
Maybe there's there's might be a tie there. It's kind of interesting, but there is a lot of horror stories that come out of Mexico, and you don't always attach the two, I think, but there's some really great ones, and this is a good example. So just wanted to highlight that one.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it is really good. You can't really say too much about these stories without giving it away. Like the Woman in Black, you can kind of only say like a certain amount, or the twist is like given away. Yeah. But yeah, those are my choices.
Right. Thanks
Cool.
very much.
Thanks for sharing.
Who's gonna go next?
Who's going next? Lulu? Oh, Lucy?
No.
No, you go.
Oh.
There we go. Right.
Lulu,
Lulu,
no?
do you wanna go?
Yes.
Okay.
Nevermore, yes.
Yeah, he's a bit worse for wear.
Yeah, sorry, I broke his leg.
You broke his leg.
Well, he was my World Book Day mascot when I came as Count Olaf, and I had him on my shoulder, and in trying to pitch from my shoulder, I just dislocated his leg. When I say dislocated, I mean snapped it off completely. So, sorry. But anyway, the Raven.
After that traumatizing story, okay.
Hey, this is Horror Week.
It's Nevermore or it's Odin, one or the other.
I'm going to talk about Macbeth, actually.
Yes, okay.
And then I'm going to talk about another more contemporary play as well. So Macbeth, you guys all know Macbeth, don't you? You guys are doing it in GCSE. So Macbeth is one of Shakespeare's tragedies, and obviously it's got all the supernatural stuff going on about it. So the witches, the Raven, because the Raven himself is horse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan. That's how the Raven comes in. But it's all about ambition and lust for power, and who has power. Is it the witches? Is it Macbeth? Is it Lady Macbeth? Is it God? Like, it's all of this stuff that I think is really interesting. It depends to what extent you play it that it's a horror. So it could be just like a straight tragedy. This is really sad. Oh, woe is me. Or you could really play out the horror. I know there was a production of Macbeth where the stage moved around like there was an earthquake, which kind of reflects like the world going mad after Macbeth disrupts the divine right of kings and stuff like that. I also know there was I think there was a production of Macbeth at the Globe where a raven actually flew onto the stage while it was being performed, and which was lucky, and the actor spoke to it, and then it flew off. Apparently, a really good line, which is
unplanned.
Unplanned,
Oh,
and it was good.
Oh, that's obviously part of the Legends of the Globe then.
Yeah.
Of course, it's the play where everything usually happens in it.
Don't say
Absolutely,
Macbeth
yeah.
in a theatre. It's a Scottish play, you should call it that, unless you're performing it. It was on at the Globe in March. It definitely was on in March. I think it was on until like June.
Yeah, we went. Didn't
Yeah, we scored it.
went.
I didn't see it, but I'm
No,
sure
you
it was
missed that
great.
But I know the set was cool because I've seen the set and stuff. So yeah, that was the first play I wanted to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Then the second play I wanted to talk about was 222 Ghost Story.
Oh yes.
I saw that in the summer.
Yes. Has anyone else seen it?
I haven't, no.
No.
Don't. No, it's really good. It's
No.
terrifying.
Okay.
I'm a big scaredy cat. If you guys know. So I was with my
Says she
two
who
friends.
performed Scream outside her bathroom window.
Oh yeah, I did do that, but that's another story. I'm really scared of things and people, and I saw it with my two friends, and I was holding their hands the whole time, which is like basically sums up how I felt about this. But they're really secretive about the plot because of how it moves. But if you ever see it, you'll see what I mean. I saw it with yeah.
Oh, it is still on.
It's got rotating.
Oh,
They
right.
do a lot of stunt casting. So I saw it with Tom Felton, who played Draco Malfoy in the Harry Potter films, and I saw it with Mandip Gill, who is my personal favourite, who played Yasmin in Doctor Who, and she was really good. Tom Felton only really plays himself, but he's really good at that.
He's good at playing himself.
So I don't blame him for that. I didn't notice it until my friend said that. I was like, that's clever, I'm going to steal that. But yeah, he plays himself. And obviously with Macbeth, especially if you play it at the Globe rather than maybe the Royal Shakespeare Company, you don't really have lights and sound effects and sound recordings, so you can only have live music in the Globe, unless you're me. But then 222 is like the complete opposite of that. And there's like the whole play is kind of made by these like sound effects and lighting. It would not work without all of this stuff, which I think is quite an interesting comparison. Like, what did people watching Macbeth think was scary? Shakespeare's kind of carried by the words. You have to let the words do the work, otherwise it doesn't work. But this is kind of carried by like the set and the props and all of that. It's essentially about a woman who's convinced that her new house, it's kind of a renovated, like, old property is being haunted by this ghost, and that her baby is the target of this ghost for some reason. It's really good. So scary.
It is scary.
It's set in a kitchen. It's got this amazing, it's contemporary realism, so it kind of makes it even more scary. But it's got this amazing kitchen set with a back door, and every time the lights turned off, I was convinced that someone would be at the back door. Yeah. And they kept playing with me, and it was not funny.
And the foxes as well.
Yeah, the foxes. There's these fox noises. If you guys have ever heard foxes,
well, that is truly scary.
Yeah, I live next to a graveyard, so I can hear them.
Gosh.
I don't want to know what they're doing.
I can hear them every night, and that night when you went to see it, they were screaming outside.
No, it really does sound like Charles being murdered.
Yeah,
it does.
It does. And they played on that.
This is awful.
Yeah. So I would recommend bring a friend who doesn't mind you like clutching onto her.
Go home and watch something really nice.
Yes. I actually saw it at the last minute as well, so I didn't have the time to. I booked the tickets about 45 minutes before it opened. Like I went and saw it, so I didn't have the emotional time to like prep myself. So I would recommend booking it like 2 or 3 months in advance, so that you really
so
like
build up to it.
Yeah, so that you say your goodbyes and. Yeah, anyway, that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lily.
Thank you, Lily.
Oh, yeah, we gotta sort of have to.
Don't
pop
let
him
me
up
stop
there.
this.
I'm nice to him now.
Oh no.
Oh,
Down he goes.
oh, Jim lad.
You talk about
Okay. Anybody else?
It's me then, is it?
Something,
All right.
yes.
Okay, now I'm going to echo Miss Rio's sentiments about short stories and how, they do make for good horror stories, and there is no better than M.R. James. But what I am going to do, I'm going to give away one of the stories. I'm going to read some of it to you and in the process give it away because, it just wouldn't work otherwise. Now, M.R. James, he is the master of the ghost story, and he has done a lot of stories that have been adapted for TV over Christmas in recent years. So Miss Huntley mentioned A Whistle I'll Come to You, My Lad. That was made into an adaptation, must have been about at least 5 years ago now, with John Hurt as the main character.
Yes, even longer, I would think.
Yeah, at least 5 years.
It's terrifying. I've even seen it on stage, and it was still terrifying.
Oh, it is petrifying.
Yeah.
Now, what he's really good at, and this is why he's like the master of the horror short story, he's really good at sort of doing the slow burn build-up where they can seem like mundane settings. He seems to like having sort of these sort of like lonely bachelor types as his main characters, very much like him. Yeah, exactly, and him himself. And he would sort of like have these evenings where they would like read each other ghost stories, and he was really into that. And so it all seems quite mundane, all seems quite mundane and civilized, but then there's this palpable sense of unease under the surface, and it builds and builds, and suddenly something really horrific happens, and he's just brilliant at that. And so A Whistle Coming to My Lad is, of course, it's about a guy who he goes to another sort of coastal town, and he's walking on the beach, and he's haunted by a sort of spectral figure.
It's always the eastern coast as well.
It's always the east. Again, the geographical. Yeah, so there's that one, and then there's also the Tractate Myth, which is has a librarian protagonist, and he gets involved in sort of like finding this document, and he has a bit of a illness spell, and he gets for a rest cure. He goes and he gets involved in this sort of inheritance thing, and again something really horrific builds up to something horrific happening there. And there's been various adaptations, but the one I want to talk about is purely because of its title. It's Mr. Humphreys and His Inheritance. Oh. So this is about me. He wrote this one about me. Now the story of Mr. Humphreys and His Inheritance, the basic. So I'll tell you that. Sorry, what do you say? The basic story of Mr. Humphreys and His Inheritance. Now, Mr. Humphreys, he's an unassuming bachelor, and he comes into an inheritance. It's his uncle, who doesn't really know. He's never really spoken to him. And he's left in this lovely house, this lovely countryside pile. But alongside this countryside pile is this very strange maze. And he gets very curious about it, and he does loads of investigations into it. He goes into it, and he eventually actually manages to make it to the middle of the maze. And the previous owners and everyone might go, how did you manage to make it to the maze? This is a beautiful maze, and in the middle is a sort of like an item. I would go into the detail what the item is, but it's basically in the library that's in his house. Another connection to me. Yeah? Yes. He finds a sort of document, because I'm a librarian, Lulu. So no. It was written by M.R. James. It's there in black and white. I wish I'd written it myself. But yeah, there's a book that sort of says, there's this amazing jewel, and it's got all these magic properties, but beware, because there's all sorts of other things too. I'm simplifying it quite a lot here, because. So basically, he gets a woman involved. What's her name? Lady Wardrop. She gets involved because she's also got a bit of a connection to it, and she basically says, she gives him some resources to look at. Okay, and we're getting towards the end here, and he basically, so he's in his house now, and he's looking at these blueprints that Lady Wardrop has given him. Okay. The tracing of the plan for Lady Wardrop and the careful collation of it with the original blueprint she gave him, meant a couple of hours' work at least. Accordingly, soon after 9, Mr. Humphreys had his materials put out in the library and began. It was a still, stuffy evening, so think of the atmosphere here. Windows had to stand open, and he had more than one grisly encounter with a bat. Bats. All these little gothic tropes. These unnerving episodes made him keep the tail of his eye on the window. Once or twice it was a question whether there was, not a bat, but something more considerable that had a mind to join him. Ooh. How unpleasant would it be if someone had slipped noiselessly over the sill and was crouching on the floor? The tracing of the plan was done, of the maze. It remained to compare it with the original and see whether any paths had been wrongly closed or left open. With one finger on each paper, he traced out the course that must be followed from the entrance. There were one or two slight mistakes, but here, near the centre, there was a bad confusion, probably due to the entry of the second or third bats. More bats. Before correcting the copy, he followed out carefully the last turnings of the path on the original. These, at least, were right. They led without a hitch to the middle space. Here was a feature which need not be repeated on the copy, an ugly black spot about the size of a shilling. Ink? No. It resembled a hole, but how should a hole be there? He stared at it with tired eyes. The work of tracing had been very laborious, and he was drowsy and oppressed. But surely this was a very odd hole. It seems to go not only through the paper, but through the table on which it lay. Yes, and through the floor below that, down and still down, even into infinite depths. He craned over it, utterly bewildered. Just as, when you were a child, you may have pored over a square inch of counterpane until it became a landscape with wooded hills, and perhaps even churches and houses, and you lost all thought of the true size of yourself and it. So this hole seemed to Humphreys, for the moment, the only thing in the world. For some reason, it was hateful to him from the first. He had gazed at it for some moments before any feeling of anxiety came upon him, and then it did come, stronger and stronger, horror lest something might emerge from it, and a really agonised conviction that a terror was on its way, from the sight of which he would not be able to escape. Oh yes, far, far down there was a movement, and the movement was upwards towards the surface. Nearer and nearer it came, and it was of a blackish grey colour with more than one dark hole. It took the shape as a face, a human face, a burnt human face, and with the odious writhings of a wasp creeping out of a rotten apple, there clambered forth an appearance of a form. Waving black arms prepared to clasp the head that was bending over them. What happens next, you'll have to read on and find out. So I didn't give it completely away. But there you go, there's the example, there's the creeping terror. Obviously there's a lot before that, and that's like more sense of unease, but they're...
It's always underground, isn't it, as well?
Yeah. It's always like, emerging from a sort of deep, dark place.
Yeah.
You think of Tracks of Myth, the big reveal is there. And there was the one with they had Rory Kinnear, the painting in the house.
Yes.
What was that one? Can't remember what that one was
I
called.
don't know, because I've only ever seen it,
Right.
joining it after it started. So I guess they might put it on again over Christmas.
There's a good
definitely
chance.
a Mark Gatiss
Yeah.
ghost story again, I think. So.
Absolutely. And they will certainly repeat any one of those that he has made, or M.R. James, any other, or M.R. James adaptations, because there was loads of them in was it the 70s they made? Quite a few. I've only seen a few of those.
Yeah.
So there you go. M.R. James.
It's really interesting. It's something that the BBC have constantly got on sounds. They've got ghost stories all the time, and there's the podcast, the Battersea Poltergeist, and then there's what was the one we were talking about yesterday? The Witch Farm. Witch Farm. This particular journalist come writer has got this real thing now about ghost stories, and then people join in and get involved and sort of investigate. And, it's a genre that keeps being reinvented, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Started something.
Yeah, absolutely, and we all have a good scare over Christmas as well. So here we go. So look out for those over Christmas.
Yes, the Gothic.
The Gothic.
With the K. Horror
Gothic.
continues to haunt us. Yes.
Right.
Thanks, everybody.
So, are you coming back in a seat, or?
I'll come back in. Because we've got lots of things, haven't we? We've got Mr. Sedgwick. We've got Edgar Allan Poe, American. We've spoken about Shirley Jackson before, haven't we, Miss Rio? Did yours a while ago? And then, of course, we've got Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is pretty horrific. Very clever, isn't it? Yeah. House of Leaves, that's the one that has all the sorts of different ways of writing, doesn't it, in it? And, the book itself becomes...
it's sort of...
The book itself becomes part of the horror. Yeah, really odd. Yeah.
Messes with your mind.
Yes.
I like little poems as well. Obituaries.
Yeah, different ways of writing. And then we've got Sarah Waters, the little friend. Little Stranger. Yes.
Sleepy Hollow.
Yes. Yeah.
Edgar Allan Poe, of course, with the Raven, and
Yes.
Tales of Mystery and Imagination.
Yes.
Turn of the Screw.
Another James.
Henry
M.R.
James.
James and Henry James.
Henry
Yes.
James, M.R. James, that's right, yes. Even worse, in my view, is an opera by Benjamin Britten. And Benjamin Britten, of course, is the classic opera composer who really, he's a very dark, much darker than even 19th century opera. So, yeah. Great.
Sorry, can I mention a book?
Yes, do.
Cool. Okay, so I was like working up the courage to actually talk about this book. So I love horror films, but I never liked horror books because I think they're a lot scarier than horror films. Until I read the Southern Book Club's Guide to Hunting Vampires by Grady Hendrix. I don't know if any of you have
I've
read
heard of it.
Has anyone heard of it?
I've heard of it. Is that the one with the peaches on the cover?
Yeah, I think, they are peaches. It's got a stunning cover, and it's basically set in the 50s in America, and it's about a group of housewives who have a book club, and they talk about books that are kind of like cheap books you would get like from Lidl or something, or their equivalent of like
Sort of Pulp
1950s
Fiction.
American Lidl,
Yes.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so they have this group, and it's sort of like to kill time basically, because they don't really, other than housework and stuff, they're not really supposed to go out. And one day a man comes to their town and he's very suspicious. He has no reason for being in this town, and back then it's kind of odd if someone just randomly moves into your town. And ever since he comes to this town, things have been going very, very wrong. People have been going missing, things have been found lying dead on the street, that sort of vibe. And one of the housewives initially goes up to him to kind of try and be hospitable with, like, I don't know, like a peach cobbler or something. And then she gets to know him more and more and realises that something is really off about this guy. However, no one believes her, obviously. And as much as it's a story about vampirism, it's also about how housewives in the 50s were treated, how
Sort of
sexism,
Stepford Wives.
yeah, that sort of thing.
Yes.
And I think it was really powerful in the way that, obviously it was like a reinterpretation of vampires, like the way he attacks people is completely different, and it was very, very sophisticated and also very terrifying in its own way. But also there's a lot, the way Hendricks writes makes it feel very folklore, mythical kind of narrative, which was really like beautiful but also terrifying. But then I think what Hendricks does really well is he presents horror in a very obvious way with the vampires, and then horror in a very subtle way with the way that the women are treated by their husbands and by society, and how over and over she tries to tell these people that something is not right, but she's constantly being told, like, you're just at home all day, you've been smelling paint, you know.
Patronising,
which I
isn't
think
it?
was mentioned in 222 actually, when they... So it's kind of similar in that way, that people are just telling them, you're crazy, you need to get out of the house a bit more. And I think arguably that is a bit more scary than the actual vampire itself. Like, I think a lot of the times in movies and books, sexism is portrayed in a very obvious way so that everybody understands. Whereas here it's so subtle, it was all in the tone of the insults, and it was in the timing of the insults, and all these really, really subtle things that makes you feel exactly the way that these women would have felt. And obviously as women, a lot of the times I would put myself in their position and think, this would have happened to me all the time, like if I'd said this. And then the second book by him, which I thought was equally as terrifying and a bit more applicable to you guys, I think, is My Best Friend's Exorcism, which ironically I
That's
bought,
a good title.
I bought when I was with my best friend, and she thought it was really suspicious that I was buying it with her. But it's basically about these two girls, and I think it's set in the 80s, which is such an iconic time, so it's really fun to read. And they're in high school, so they're about your ages, and one of them is sort of like the duff, if you will, like the less attractive one, and then the other one is the very attractive one, and she's the one that gets possessed one day, and it's amazing because it goes through every single stage of possession in amazing detail. So you get to kind of like explore that psychologically on your own whilst you're reading at night, and it's honestly really, really scary if you're afraid of that sort of thing. I'm very like superstitious, so that sort of thing really scared me, and I genuinely thought it was going to happen to me at one stage whilst I was reading it.
If it's really powerful.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's very, very detail orientated.
Yeah.
But again, Hendricks always puts a spin on social injustices with like this narrative of obvious horror. And so whilst he's talking about these possessions and all these creepy things happening to this girl, it's also talking about like coming of age issues and boys and best friends and relationships being strained because of this possession sort of thing. And so I thought it was really interesting, like reliving the teenage years, but with a horror lens. And it was just a lot more fun. Like it's a lot more fun than Southern Book Club, but I would say Southern Book Club is just iconic, and it's one of those books you have to read before you die, sort of thing.
Okay.
So highly recommend both of those.
Thank you. Okay. Because that's following on from somebody who was writing much earlier, who was writing sort of in the 50s, like R11. He wrote Stepford Wives, and also a book called Rosemary's Baby, which then was made into a horrific...
That's crazy.
I think I'm sure they
Yeah,
are.
yeah.
Yes,
I think it is,
Yeah,
I love
Yeah.
Rosemary's Baby.
but that's
It's horrible, but
Yeah,
you know,
I was going to
yes.
say.
within
but it's a
that.
sort of you can see how it can almost be. It's is it horror? Is it actually real? Is it mental health? That sort of thing, isn't it? And it's that anxiety that, you know.
that's stressful.
Yes, that stressful
Similar
situation.
to what you're saying, that's kind of the scariest bit, is that no one really believes her over the actual. The horror is horror, you know, it's tropey and all that, but that's the scariest part in a way. Is that's interesting that you say that. Maybe he took the two and kind of was like.
I mean, obviously, you know, as a reader, it's all real. Like every single thing she's saying, as horrific as it sounds, it's all real because you're there with her, like seeing everything.
Yes.
But they're just. It's not real, belittling her all the time, and it makes you so angry and shake the book, and you want to tear the pages out. But in that way, it's just phenomenal.
Really
I've been meaning to read
writing.
that.
You should.
Oh, thank you.
Excellent.
That
good.
was a good recommendation. Great. So plenty of dark reading for the next few months then.
Yes.
Yes.
But also, it is Christmas coming, and next week.
It's Christmas reads
next week. We're going to do our Christmas reads.
Yes.
So yes.
We're almost at the end of term. So, yes. So good. So come along.
Come along with a festive.
With a festive book or story or something. Yes, absolutely. And if that's not festive enough, we've got Christmas Carol being performed by Year 8 and 9 in the hall this evening and tomorrow. Yeah. So
there you go. That'll get you in a festive mood. And of course, there are elements of horror to that with the ghosts.
Yes, of course. Absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah.
Neatly ties it in.
Yeah, that's good. Great. Thanks, everybody.
All right,
for coming.
thank you, everyone.
And look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.